It is ACC Baseball Etc. presented, as always, by our friends at Academy Sports and Outdoors, where they carry all the best gear from all the top brands, all at prices you will love. And shopping is more convenient than ever at academy.com and on the Academy app. Enjoy free shipping on orders of $25 or more with sign-in. Shop anytime, anywhere, and find your widest selection of colors, styles, and sizes at Academy Sports and Outdoors. I'm Daron Vaught. Bradley Smart is with me of ACC Extra, D1Baseball.com, of course, is where you read him. Smart, good to see you. Good to have you back here. This is a good feeling. I know, right? Summer content is what it is. It's different. But now we've got, there's football on our TVs on the weekends. There's like a crispiness to the air. It's fall. So fall ball is well on its way. And that's what we're here to talk about. But first of all, I want to talk about Bradley Smart. How are you, sir? How was your summer? Everything going well?
I'm doing great. I think that was a great description of the enjoyment that fall brings. It's my favorite season, I would say. And yeah, I'm just excited that we get to talk about teams and players that are on campus, and kind of the hypotheticals and the chaos of the summer is over, and it's okay. You've got a roster, you got to get them together in the fall, and you got to prepare for the spring, and it's a really fun time.
I think that's a good place to start because the climate is different than it's ever been for a summer, and the summers for, especially like you guys writing at D1Baseball.com day in and day out, it's different than it's ever been because the summer is a lot less. I mean, look, there's still summer ball going on. There's still games being played. There's still, actual baseball evaluation to do. But at the same time, it's largely about, okay, who's going where? What are these teams going to look like when they get to campus, right? So I think you're right in that it feels like there's more anticipation for fall ball than ever, just simply because of, okay, what's a team going to look like? Because you can't depend on it being totally based on what we saw the last time we saw a team in the spring, right?
Yeah, and that was kind of one of my summer projects. Is I looked a lot at roster construction and sort of how it's changed, and it's crazy. Like you look at rosters throughout the country, and you're looking at guys where maybe like 50% of the plate appearances in the innings are they didn't start their career at that school. So like every year it's less of who do they get back. It's okay, they bring back some impact guys, but how are they building around them? And I think there's so many different things we could talk about with that. But I think one of the things with the last week or so, I've been catching up with, coaches and sort of talking like, how was the off season? And almost all of them have been like, that was the most challenging off season I've ever had. And, I thought the previous year was harder, but this one with, the roster and the draft and all this uncertainty, it just made it, like nightmarish. So I think the challenge of the summer, they're all happy they're on campus now. They have their rosters and they can kind of just go ahead and go and coach, which I thought was pretty interesting.
All right, so here's how this is going to go. This is fall storylines. I feel like if this was on the D1 proper pod, they would do a fall storylines draft and find a way to find a winner. We're not going to do that necessarily, but I have asked you, as I have done, to prepare a few fall storylines that you are looking forward to seeing flesh out, progress, things you're excited for with this fall season. So we've got a few of those. We're just going to go back and forth and talk about some of the things we are most anticipating for the fall. All right. Bradley, I'm going to give you the honors of going first. So what is what is the thing you are most excited to learn or observe or what have you this fall?
Yeah. I think I'm most interested in, the 3 head coaching changes. I think that's obviously, the coaching carousel as a whole was down this past year. The previous year, I think we had like 45 or 44 D1 head coaching changes. This year, I think it's something like 23, 24. But 3 of those are in the ACC. And with that, if you had to like name ACC head coaches off the top of your head, Danny Hall, Brian O'Connor, those guys would have been pretty high up on that list. And so they're both gone, Mississippi State in retirement. And so you have this, this kind of shuffling around where, it presents itself as 3 completely different scenarios that these coaches had. So you have Pollard going to, Virginia and bringing his entire staff, which is very rare. You have Ramsey, James Ramsey at Georgia Tech going up a rung and just kind of sliding everyone up and keeping them all together, moving, Scott Strickland from ops into an assistant role. So it's the same, core group, obviously outside of Hall the year before. So there's barely any turnover there. And then you have Corey Muscara putting together a brand new staff at Duke, figuring it all out. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how these 3 schools do with this completely different, like when you look at expectations too, like very different expectations for what they're going to do at these schools next year. And not talking long term, just like 2026. So really interested to see how those 3 kind of do in their new roles.
Those 3 are lumped into my number 1. So I think we can keep this going. My first theme for the fall is familiar faces in new places, because each of those coaching changes that you mentioned, we know all of them. Like Chris Pollard we're going to be adjusting still to seeing him and his staff in Virginia uniform as opposed to Duke baseball uniform, where, Pollard was for a dozen years and had a lot of success. Same for Corey Muscara and his move from Wake Forest to Duke. And it's like, look, we have expected him to eventually become a head coach for a long time. And at times it seemed like it was going to happen, not in the ACC. I'm glad that it happened in this league, and he's still within a geographical reach for our purposes, for mine especially being in North Carolina. So I'll see a lot of him in that program. But that's a guy that we've gotten to know pretty well over the years at Wake Forest. And James Ramsey, the same thing. I mean, he's an institution at Georgia Tech in a much different way than Danny Hall is, but he's stepping into that job as the heir to the Yellow Jackets program. So it's all people we know, which is cool. And I don't know if it's rare per se that 3 jobs would change hands and it's all people who have been in the conference, right? And obviously there were other coaches involved as potential candidates in those searches that could have been outsiders, if you will. But it's cool. It's really, really cool that is the case with those 3 head coaching changes. On the other end of this, there are the player perspectives, new places for familiar faces. And just like to name a couple, the biggest perhaps, we've got Alex Sosa transferring from NC State to Miami. He is a South Florida guy, so he's going home in a sense. And Jaron Advincula is now part of James Ramsey's Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, the former Cal Golden Bears star. He just made the all Cape Cod team for the 2nd summer in a row. So like that's a big time get for a Georgia Tech team that's going to have a lot of high expectations coming into the year anyway. And like that's just the top of the list. There are more where that came from. It is becoming increasingly more and more commonplace for players to transfer from one ACC school to another. And even between rivals, Macon Winslow from Duke to North Carolina, he was, one of the Duke guys that did not follow Chris Pollard to Virginia. So, I mean, that's 3 of just a huge number of transfers that you'll see. And if you're a little bit more casual of a fan and not a diehard, you'll maybe recognize the name and be like, where do I know that name from? It's like, oh, he was with them last year, right? Like it's going to be cool to see all of that pan out and take shape. And the fall is the start of that, because that's when we start to see them in Alex Sosa's not going to be in red and white and the block S. He's going to be in green and orange for Miami.
Yeah, I think it's so. I mean, you're definitely right. This happens more and more each year. The portal, you have the ability to go anywhere. Like, there's no that rule where you sit out for a year within your conference is long gone. But it's so interesting to me. The Winslow example is like a perfect one. Like, North Carolina and Duke hate, this, like they hate each other. Like, those games on the diamond even are kind of infused with like more than an average regular season series. Like, I know North Carolina and like NC State are pretty big rivals as well. Like, I don't want to nitpick rivalries, but like,
Sure.
when you think of North Carolina and Duke, that's a big one. And to just kind of swap over, like, makes sense. Like, you're looking for a new location. You didn't have a coach yet, figuring out what you're doing. Makes sense to go to the closest, ACC school. But it is kind of crazy to see the list. Like, some of the other ones, Ryan Zuckerman, Pitt going to Georgia Tech, Bryson Moore, Virginia to Florida State, Gabe Nard, and another Duke kid, Florida State. These are good. These are really talented players. You even have another rival, I think Brendan Cowan, Virginia Tech, going to Virginia. Like, it's definitely a storyline, and I think it's going to be weird for fans of those schools to see those fall pictures, like you said, and then also if they play them in the regular season, it can be kind of strange. Like, obviously Winslow, you'll see Duke, so it'll be interesting to follow that.
Yeah, the Winslow thing is especially funny to me given the proximity, right? I mean, it's, the schools are very close to each other. I myself am a resident basically on the Chapel Hill Durham border, so I'm right there near both. If I'm not mistaken, Macon Winslow's, I think I've got this right, his father provided the sod that was down on the grounds at Jack Coombs Park, not like this playing surface, but like up on the berms and stuff, because where they had the construction and the renovations and all that, you gotta put new grass down. And I think it was Macon Winslow's dad's company that did it. So like, it was a fun story then when he's a player for the team, but now he plays for the team's rival. And, there's a familial tie to just literally the ground there at Duke's facility. It's cool. It stands to offer up some fun storylines for sure. And look, I mean, like it creates I know we're not in a college sports environment where a player stays for 4 years much anymore. I think maybe in baseball we get it more than most sports. But it still doesn't happen a ton. I do think we make up for that if we can get these transfers. Like, it's the familiarity that makes us maybe averse to that, right? Because I think you hear people and their qualms about maybe, for instance, college basketball in modern times, and they're like, well, the one and dones, or they're going to play it somewhere and then transfer to a bigger conference and a bigger school or whatever, and the claim is you don't get to know the players. Man, in the ACC, I feel like we are a legit league of our own in this case, because it's just like a big blockbuster trade happening is the difference, right? So like, we get to see guys with new teams and new threads make a big difference. Like, I think we're going to see this year. It's going to be a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's blockbuster trade's a good kind of way to phrase it. Although I don't know if trade is the right word.
No, because I mean, like, the other end got nothing out of it really, except an open space on their roster and on their scholarship list. But so a trade, but like, it's the effect of that, right? It's I don't know that a specific sport and in a specific conference in college sports, we've gotten quite the effect that we're going to have in ACC baseball in the spring, where it's like guys have just been moved around, and it feels a little more like, big league. It's like, Johnny Damon leaves the Red Sox and signs with the Yankees, right? That's making Winslow. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to say the least. And again, I think it's going to be a different dynamic than we've ever seen sort of in a vacuum in college sports before.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with all of that. And I think what makes it, the reason it happened too, is like you said, we know these three new head coaches. Like one of them was a head coach, obviously, in the league for a decade plus. And then the other two are assistants that have just, gone up. So I think that also created this. I don't think we'll see this next year necessarily.
No.
Or maybe we will, but it seems more likely
Look, depending on the level of like fun that it provides, I'm up for it every year, right? Like, let's just make it a requirement that if you commit to an ACC school, you got to play for 2 in your career, and we'll just swap dudes and have that stipulation. I'm all for that. I think that's fun. So, anyways, it'll be really interesting to observe, and that's, yes, a fall storyline, but it's also kind of a looking ahead to the spring storyline as well that I think is going to make ACC baseball really exciting. What's number 2 on your list of fall storylines to look ahead to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that stood out last year was, we had 5 teams going into the final weekend with a chance at the regular season crown. And, it felt like there were teams that for stretches were really dominant, and then, something would happen or they'd hit some bumps in the road, and no one really separated, which is how you got, Georgia Tech winning it on the final day, like, the regular season crown, that is. I think one thing I'm interested in is, it seems like each time I talk to a coach and I dive into the fall rosters, it feels like a lot of teams did really good business this offseason in terms of, who they brought in, what their freshman class looks like. And I'm really interested to see, are we going to have like a dominant team again? Like, are we going to go back to, there were years when, North Carolina or whoever it was would just kind of run over the league? Or is this just sort of the future? Are we going to always have, this log jam top to bottom? So I'm really interested to see what teams look like in the fall depth wise, and if there's any way we can sort of parse out like a leader, so to speak.
Do you have any theories that you're tossing around right now? I know info is kind of limited, but we do know like the highly publicized transfers and I mean, we have a sense of who's going to be where.
Yeah. I mean, what stands out to me is there's definitely, like, Georgia Tech's a team that comes to mind where it's like the hype train has left the station, so to speak. Like, that team, what they return offensively, and when you pair adding, Advincula and Zuckerman, in a change of scenery, you have potentially 4 first rounders because Hernandez is draft eligible. You have Drew Burris, obviously, Von Lackey. Like, we know Georgia Tech's going to hit. They've taken strides on the mound the last few years. Like, that's as close of okay, this team seems like they, should be installed as the preseason favorite. Obviously, they won last year. But then you start going through some of these other rosters and you're like, okay, why are we discrediting, Louisville? Like, they're bringing back quite a few draft prospects of their own, Lucas Moore and Zion Rose. Like, those are 2 guys that anybody would want. And then you're like, okay, well, what about Florida State? Like, they lost 11 draft picks, but it's Link Jarrett, and he brought in probably the top transfer arm in Trey Beard. You have Wes Mendez back. You have a good 1-2 punch. And then you have guys like Bailey and Carnes. And then you have Miami, who, no idea what the pitching is going to be necessarily after Siskar and DeReyes, but you have a lineup that could stack up with Georgia Tech at the end of the day. Maybe not on draft potential, but on, results. So I think I'm just listing teams at this point, but I think it kind of makes my point where it's, I feel like I feel like last year's competitiveness is sort of what the ACC is going to be, like, top to bottom. Like, you had Pitt making a run late last year. They bring in the highest, like, one of the highest drafted freshmen that didn't sign. So it's like, I think it's just getting deeper and deeper, and that parity is only going to remain.
Two. I'm glad you mentioned Pitt because they were on my short list here. One of the better recruiting classes that they've ever had, and they've got some high hopes for this coming season. So I'm very intrigued to see some of the teams that we normally think of as not being as well resourced that I think have a chance to be pretty good next spring. Including Pitt, but also Notre Dame. Look, this is the nation's Catholic university, right? It is a massive athletics program that if they want to devote dollars to baseball in this new revenue sharing ecosystem, they have that ability. And again, we typically think of them as a team in baseball anyway that's under-resourced, and I don't think that's going to be the case. Sean Stifler had a really good freshman class that we all gushed about last year. No Carson Tenney, he transferred to Texas, so that's kind of a bummer for the league. Excited for Carson to get to play on that stage and further boost his profile for sure. But like Bino Waters is a big time prospect and had a huge freshman season for Notre Dame. They're just going to keep building that thing. And I'm a believer in what Sean Stifler is doing, especially if you give him a little bit of leash and some things to work with around him. So Pitt and Notre Dame, I think broadly would be the next bullet, and maybe throw BC into that as well, right? Because I think we're believers in Todd Interdonato, and they're kind of typically in that same categorization.
Yeah, and Pitt is one of those schools that I want to see succeed. Like obviously the elephant in the room is the tournament drought. They're trying to get to the NCAA tournament for the first time since '95. But I feel like each year there's I just wrote a piece, kind of catching up on, caught up with Mike Bell and sort of discuss what Pitt's trying to do. And it's this blend of, we know we have to recruit and develop, but we also know like we have a niche in the transfer portal where it's guys that, maybe started at a high major, dropped down, came back, guys that were sort of overlooked. And I think they added a bunch of guys this offseason that fit that mold of those 2021 and 2022 teams, which is the 2 years they were closest to the tournament, just kind of slumped a bit down the stretch in one, I think. But yeah, I really like who they brought in, and I like sort of the way they build their rosters. I think the experience, the sort of veterans, while developing guys like Ryan Reed's a good example on the mound. The problem is it just takes time, and it's difficult to compete in the ACC with that. But yeah, I'm excited to see what Pitt does. And I think Notre Dame's one where everyone's like, oh, Carson Tenney's gone. Like this is they had a good end of the year, 17-9 down the stretch, but they're gonna regress a lot. I think they could be better. I think they could be more consistent. I think obviously Tenney's a huge loss. I think Rory Fox going in the draft, that's a big player you have to replace, but you get Jack Riddell back, you get the freshman, you get a good incoming class, and you get guys that have been in the program, like the Jace Lees and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm definitely interested to see what Notre Dame does this year.
Yeah. What's next on your list? I know I've kind of piggybacked on both of yours with both of mine, but that was legitimately, those were on my list, so might as well knock them out.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a bunch of little like quick hitters that have sort of caught my eyes. I've gone. I think one that's pretty interesting. We talked a lot at down the stretch last year about Virginia Tech, and just how it was, it's a bit of deja vu. Actually, not even deja vu. It was the same end of the season as the previous years. But I'm intrigued by what they did. Obviously Ryan Fecto's off to, Pepperdine, and they've replaced him with, Xavier's pitching coach. They brought in a general manager, with experience. And, they brought in, a pitching performance analytics guy. Like they took steps. I think one of the things with Virginia Tech is obviously last year injuries were the death of them. Like it was unbelievable. It felt like every game you were losing someone that you needed in the lineup or on the mound, and that made things really challenging. But I do think with some of the development paths and sort of how pitchers looked year over year, and different areas where it's like, okay, can we get more out of these guys? Like you have Brent Renfroe back, Team USA heading the staff, and you have this new sort of pitching apparatus around him, and the bullpen and the guys following him. You obviously took some losses in the portal, but I'm really interested to see, what does that staff look like? Can they stay healthier? Can they, throw more strikes? Can they do these things? So I think that's one area I'm pretty interested in seeing.
I think in and of itself, Renfroe's fascinating because I don't know, like we talk like fans, right? And we know the score with the transfer portal and how things are. I think Renfroe was one of the more surprising non-transfers after his freshman year. And for that to be the case again after a sophomore season in which he's still that guy, I think it's a huge testament to Coach Sheff and what he's doing there, or at least he's instilling something that's providing some hope and some belief for guys that have experienced some things that would make it pretty easy to lose that belief, right? So I think that's a big compliment to Virginia Tech as a program, to be able to keep Renfroe like they've been able to. So yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm going to mention a program we haven't yet, and I know how this is going to sound because I'm the Rintaro guy. I'm really interested to see a sophomore ACC campaign, not just for Rintaro, but for Stanford. They had stretches. You talked about it. Teams that looked good at points. Stanford, those first couple of ACC weekends, got to where they were ranked. And then it fell apart. And maybe it was the extensive travel that got in the way, but the argument could be made, hey, look over at the Big Ten. The West Coast teams there fared pretty well. So I don't know that that's a fair excuse or explanation for the way that Cal and Stanford performed in the ACC last year. But I think it is organically, it's going to happen so that the coaching staffs in both of those places are going to be able to better know very basic logistical things that, hey, this is going to serve us better doing it this time around. This is going to serve us in ways that we did not get last year if we do things this way. So I think there are going to be some small changes with those programs, and I'm interested to see exactly what those changes are, right? So like talking to Mike New and David Esker preseason, it'll be something that's very high on my list to be like, hey, what did you learn? Less about the baseball, but about running a team on the West Coast that primarily plays its games on the other side of the country. What did you learn, and what are you going to do differently this year? That interests me. And again, that's more of a spring look ahead. But I'll hyper focus it on Rintaro, who was at the Cape over the summer. Looked good, not spectacular, but he was fine. He was Rintaro. I still believe it. This dude's it's a generational talent. You don't smash those Japanese high school baseball records without having it. And there have been a lot of things for him to adjust to. So just like it was important for him to be on campus a year early and with the team traveling a year early before he started his eligibility clock, I think this past spring will inform a lot of what happens with him this year. And that starts, getting back on campus for the fall, and setting himself up for a spring that is going to be pretty big for him. If you don't know the story, by all means, Rintaro, I did a 6-part series on the D1 Proper Pod, so would love for you to check it out. But if you're unaware of the circumstances surrounding Sasaki, they become a bit more pressurized this year because he's draft eligible. This is it. This is what he came here for. And again, that starts with the academic year beginning with fall and his performance in fall ball. So I'm interested to see how that progresses.
Yeah. I think Stanford's one of those teams that, it was hard to read last year, where it's like, okay, they have all these guys back, but they were coming off not a very good season. And, it was really those tale of kind of 2 seasons, as, Esker puts it. And I caught up with him last week, and it's, he kind of looks back to, following the 2023 season where, they have, I think, 9 guys, 9 juniors drafted. They lose Braden Montgomery in the portal. And all of a sudden it's like, that's the whole heartbeat, of the team. And you go through sort of these lean years. But what I think last year really revealed is they're recruiting at a very, very high level. I mean, Stanford always will recruit at a high level because of the academics and their ability to keep guys. Like, once you're committed, it's rare to see a Stanford guy sign. And so I think what they had last year, Sasaki was the headliner, but you look at guys like Charlie Bates, you look at Tatum Marsh, who's basically an All-American, I think. You had these freshmen that immediately had huge seasons. So you bring them back. You bring back, a Jimmy Nati. You bring back guys that are hurt, that kind of, like Charlie Bates missed a huge chunk of the season. There's another outfielder that I think he got hit, missed a bit, came back, couldn't hit at all. Understandably, was not fully, it down the stretch. And then you bring in 2 of the highest, ranked ACC freshmen, 2 Brocks, which is very funny to me. But it's just, you have this, you're recruiting at a high level, and Esker's saying, he's like, these back-to-back recruiting classes, these are like the ones we had that kicked off, that Omaha run. So it's like, okay, this is Stanford a year into, the ACC. And I think all you said about what did you learn? How do you travel better? All of these things. I think you combine that with the recruiting, and it's going to be a really interesting, who wins the jobs is the big thing. Like, they played a high school shortstop in center field because of injuries, and he played incredible. And it's like, does he come back to the infield? Does he stay out there? Like what do you do? So I think that's interesting for sure.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Jimmy Nati. Because in addition to the recruiting classes, there's a leadership piece there that I think Nati can provide. This is a guy who came up with Travis Bazana in the Australian travel circuit. They're tight. He has no doubt had a sort of a sidecar seat to Bazana's success. And Jimmy feels like he's capable, not, of being a number 1 pick, but he's, Jimmy, I heard from him over the summer when it becomes kind of like decision time for guys. And I was very appreciative of the note. He just said, hey, wanted to let you know I'm headed back to school, and we're going to get Stanford back on the map. Individually, I've got my goals the same as they've always been. I want to be an All-American. And I just think he's going to be very motivated, and that works its way down. And by the time you get enough guys on a team that have reasons to be motivated, yes, it's all got to be sort of, you got to have the synergy, and they're all working toward one goal. But I say that knowing, like, what do we love about baseball? It is a team sport, but it is highly individualistic. When you're invested in doing well for yourself in ways that it can hinder teams in other sports, you're helping the team. So I mentioned Rintaro. Obvious reasons he likely will carry some added motivation into this year. Nati is going to be especially motivated. Like, I think those are building blocks when you factor in across the board, having the talent come in that they've got, that's a start, right? And it's not going to just be like that easy for everybody. You're motivated, so you have a great season. No, that's not how it works. But it's a good start. It's a good start for them.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the same tone Esker struck with Nati. It's like he could have signed easily, an undrafted free agent, but he wanted to come back, wanted to, impact, the program. And I think on a sort of separate, we talked about Stanford a lot. Cal's one that's really interesting to me too, just because, yeah, their first year was tough, but it was also like what you would expect a team that brought back no pitching, that had thrown at this level pretty much. I think they had 20% of their innings back, and like half of their plate appearances and roster was like pretty new. And it's going to be that again, but flipped. And I think that's something that's really interesting to me. We saw, sort of the growing pains, and we saw the pitching staff kind of settle in. And at the end, at the ACC tournament, it was like, okay, they've got some guys, and it wasn't just the upperclassmen, the Shaws, Tremaines, but it was like, De La Torre and Turkington, like not at the tournament, but throughout the year. And it's like, okay, they can pitch. Now they have to deal with losing, Advincula, Smaldino, this third one I'm missing there. But it's incredibly challenging if you're Mike New. You go through an off season where it's like, okay, now I have to figure out a pitching staff from scratch. Now I have to figure out a lineup and sort of build this up from scratch. But I think the one thing that stands out to me with him and with Cal is like, he's excited. Like he's like, okay, I'm bringing in 17 freshmen, and we got some D2 transfers. We have some assorted, other guys. And it's like they found success with the Jacob French jumping up a level. What's their route? How do they kind of find themselves in the conference? And I think that'll be pretty fascinating to see play out as well.
Yeah. I think we've sort of glossed over this. One of the things I'm interested to see this fall is, again, we've alluded to broadly roster construction. I'm going to pinpoint one roster in particular, and Corey Muscara was recently a guest on this show and talked about how he couldn't fill two hands when he got the job with the number of players he had like firmly on his roster at Duke. And now he's at something like 43 for the fall. So I'm fascinated to see what that mix looks like, just in the vein of roster construction that you were talking about earlier, and just knowing his approach to such things. I'm really interested to see like how it all gels together. And that's just like an exaggerated version of the problem lots of ACC teams had. So it'll be really interesting to see that. And on the flip side, like Virginia's going to be really interesting. Again, this is more of a spring look ahead. I think based on what we know right now about rosters at Mississippi State and Virginia, I think it's entirely possible that Brian O'Connor and Chris Pollard in their first years on new jobs could get to Omaha. And like that's a wild thought in college baseball history, right? I mean, just it's different now, I know, but it's just a wild thought that you could have enough sort of built in with you as a package deal. Not that that's part of signing a guy like O'Connor if you're Mississippi State, but you do get his guys as a result. That's kind of how it happens now. You don't get all of them in every case, but so I think Virginia is going to be really interesting, and I'm anxious to see them at some point this fall.
Yeah. I think Virginia, the question marks are on the mound. I think that's something to follow this fall. Like Pollard, we know just from the years at Duke, like if he doesn't have guys he trusts to throw, him and Kirkpatrick, if they don't have guys they trust to throw 5 or 6 innings, they'll map out, the whole weekend with, okay, 2 to 3 innings here, 2 to 3 innings, he can pitch multiple times, this kind of stuff. And I'm really interested. And I talked to him about it too, where it's like, what path do you take? Like, and they don't necessarily have like a guy they're like, yes, this is a frontline Friday starter. Like they have guys that could be, like Henry Zakowski following him seems like a guy that could be. But if they don't have that trust and they're like, okay, maybe you're more of a 3 or 4 inning guy, I think that's something that just, if we're talking Virginia's potential, like they're going to hit. You put Eric Becker and AJ Grossi in the lineup together, that's tough. You put them 1-2 even, that's a lot to deal with. But you can't get to Omaha without pitching. Like we know, we've seen this play out time and time again. You can have the best lineup in the world, does not matter if you cannot get outs. So I think that'll be really interesting. Who gets what role at Virginia? And then Duke, it's funny, Tommy and I talked to Moose this morning about, you're through the offseason. What does your roster look like? Like, how do you feel about what you put together here? And I think it's a really interesting group. I think there's also there's so many new faces from sort of everywhere that play different, like multiple positions and, have all kinds of different storylines. Like you have Michael DiMartini, who should, if he plays to his full potential, all ACC outfielder, like easily. And then you have someone like Cider Cannon, who figures to maybe be their catcher. Like he was outfielder by injury necessity at Davidson, but like this is a guy that if the bat stays and he can play, he was a catcher coming into Davidson, he plays that, high level defensively that he can get to, that's maybe an all ACC catcher. And it's like, I think the Duke thing's interesting because the expectations are gonna be low, relatively low. Like you're not expected to replicate one win from Omaha, but you're also not expected to be in the bottom. Like I don't think Duke's, that somewhere in the middle of the ACC is probably where they'll land going into the preseason. But I think this fall, depending on how the pitching staff shakes out, depending on what the lineup looks like, you could start to see them climb. I really like the guys they brought in offensively. Again, don't know about the pitching. A lot of arm talent. Moose said everyone has a pitch he likes, but it's, can they add multiple pitches? What do they have around that? So I think it'll be really interesting. It is just a lot of names.
Well, to follow up on both of those, the question marks likely are going to be first with the pitching staffs. But what have we seen out of both coaches in both staffs in both cases, right? Moose has been one of the best staff managers in college baseball over the past 5-10 years. Coach Pollard and his pitching coach, Brady Kirkpatrick, have, even if they don't have a frontline guy, they have displayed an aptitude of making it work, not just like at a minimum viable level. They make it work really well when they don't have that guy, historically speaking. So yeah, no, those are intriguing storylines for sure, given the histories of both. And, I think the potential of with Virginia in particular, the lineup, right? Like you don't want to spoil that. You don't want to waste, isn't the right word, but like you don't want to lose out on, man, we're probably going to have a really, really good offense. So they'll take what they've got and piece it together the way that they see fit, which more often than not is like the best fit. So yeah, that'll be really, really interesting. Who's a newbie to the conference that you would put at the top of your list that you're most excited to see this fall?
That's a good question. I think I already mentioned DiMartini. I think he's just going to be a lot of fun. And I mentioned Trey Beard, I think with Florida State. It's another elite left-handed arm. This one way more proven than Mendez and Bellini were. Bellini obviously had the injury history. Mendez, not a ton of experience at Ole Miss. Beard was like one of the best pitchers in the country at times last year, just remarkably consistent. Obviously FAU to Florida State. So that's a big one I'm interested in. Like, who is their number one there? Could be Beard, could be Mendez. Like, I think that's great competition there. They also, that's a team that lost, 11 guys in the draft. So like bringing in someone like Braden Dowd from USC is another. I won't just list names, but I think Beard's probably the one I'm most excited for, just because of Florida State's history lately with lefties. It's just like come to be, who they are in the rotation. Like, they didn't care that they ran out, three lefties last year, and I don't know who their third guy necessarily will be this year, but yeah, Beard's probably up there for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he would be my number one also, like you said, at FAU. Just, I mean, he was with Charlotte, had Blake Gillespie, but they were two of the best pitchers in the country in the American last year. So that just seems like a fit. Like when I saw that news come across the wire, it was like, oh yeah, because of course he's going to, and he'll be a first rounder probably as a result. Like it made sense. Another one with Florida State. This is not a newbie, but I'm curious how many, like the other day in the majors, we saw Shohei Ohtani hit a 120 mile per hour home run. How many 120s is Miles Bailey going to pop in the fall? Maybe multiple. I don't know.
Yeah. Miles Bailey it just feels like a cheat code when like he really connects with one. Like, I've seen some BP from him too, where it's just like it just blows my mind. I'm really excited for year two of him. I'm also excited to see what, Hunter Carnes does as an encore. Like, obviously they really liked Jackson West last year, and you have Bailey at first. Like, it's kind of hard to get a Carnes in a lot. And they had some different things going on with DH. So I'm interested to see what sort of year two of him looks like. And then one more transfer I meant to mention. I might butcher the last name. Joe Tiroli, the rider, the MAC Player of the Year, hit like 380 with 18 home runs. Adding that's up the middle combo with Becker at Virginia. That's a lot to deal with there.
Yeah, it's a good one to mention. I've got another couple of returnees that I'm interested to see how it pans out. We've not really mentioned North Carolina in 48 minutes here. Ryan Lynch and Walker McDuffie are like the present, the future of North Carolina's pitching staff. And their development is going to be crucial. Now, their development could be not much at all, and it's still going to make the Tar Heels really good. I think everybody understands that and knows that. But the idea that those two could be in a starting rotation, if as effective as they can be in that role, as opposed to being out of the bullpen. And of course, with Lynch, we saw it in a starter's role toward the end of the year, and he came up in really, really big spots. So I would assume that's going to be the expectation for him. Man, like that's got all the possibility in the world written on it.
Yeah, and that's part of that's a good point that we have not mentioned North Carolina, who was the ACC tournament champion. They're staring down the barrel of they were pretty unique around all of college baseball in that I think like 8 of their 9 starters basically started every single game. Like, outside of, shuffling guys in left field where they finally, kind of settled on French.
Yeah, really, it was left field and DH that they were just kind of like searching the whole year. Yeah.
Yeah, but everywhere else, like, you knew who you were going to see in the lineup card, and now almost all those guys are gone. Like, you have Gallagher back. Gavin Gallagher, obviously, is a huge return. He's going to be the anchor of that lineup. But it's like, over at least 70% of the plate appearances are gone. Where they're going to need to be really good is where you just said, the mound. And they always are. Like, we know North Carolina can pitch. But Jake Knapp was as reliable as they come. So now you slide Jason DeCaro probably up. You bring Ryan Lynch in. That third guy could be McDuffie, or maybe you keep him on the back end. But whatever that combination is, they it's gonna be, last year there were all those questions at the start of the year. It's like, is North Carolina gonna hit enough? Do they have power? Do they have all these things? Obviously they found enough and got better as the year went on. I think we're gonna maybe have a repeat of those questions, unfairly, potentially, because they brought in some really interesting guys. Like, they only brought in hitters in the portal, and they brought in, I think, 6 proven bats. Owen Holt from George Mason, the North Dakota State shortstop, Jake Schaffner, Eric Paulson. Like, they brought in proven guys that hit, over 300. Obviously they brought in Macon Winslow, but it's, what does that pitching staff look like? Where do the roles kind of shake out? And then can that lineup handle, okay, we're almost entirely new here. What does that sort of dynamic look like? So that's a good call out on North Carolina, because they are a really interesting team going into the fall.
If you consider ACC baseball to be like a reality TV show, the recurring characters at this point, like I mentioned, the guys who are with new programs, but those who have stayed, like we talked about Renfro at Virginia Tech. There are key returners now forever, but like, think about it. Gavin Gallagher and Jason DeCaro are still going to be crucial pieces for North Carolina in the spring. And like, I get it, they're juniors, but they both were very big parts of a run to Omaha as freshmen. And when that happens, they both had their moments last year too, of course. Gallagher, again, in regional play was unreal. It's awesome that we have guys who are factors, massive factors for a third consecutive year. And you talk about Georgia Tech, and like Drew Burress obviously is going to be at the head of the conversation. He's the easy pick for preseason ACC Player of the Year, might be a National Player of the Year, Golden Spikes preseason pick. I love that we get these recurring characters and in our sitcom or whatever you want to call it, however you want to refer to it.
Yeah, our appointment weekend viewing.
That's it.
But yeah, like Zion Rose is another good example. Like, year 3 for him. Daniel Cuvée at Miami. It's like, I was talking to JD Arteaga about, the slow start Cuvée had and how that became, and I'm guilty of it. Like, he wasn't hitting for power. That was really the point of the slow start analogy, when obviously he was still hitting. But JD's like, the guy was hitting like 320 and he's hearing, slow start, has to like tap into more. But that's a guy who has been just a force and is now hitting in the middle of the lineup with a ton of protection again. So yeah, you kind of go team by team. Like, Wake Forest gets another year of Cade Lewis, one of those transfer additions where you get them before they're draft eligible, and he just had an unbelievable year. So it's not another,
honestly, to me, that's another ACC Player of the Year candidate, right at the top of the list. Again, Burris is going to be the far and away obvious choice. Lewis was like the best line drive hitter in the country last year. Really, really good. So I think it'll be interesting to see what Wake Forest is as a team around him. And that will maybe contribute to his success in certain ways. But no, sorry to interrupt it, but Cade Lewis was incredible.
No, you're good. And that's a good point with Wake's one that I'm interested to see. They brought in they kept it kind of light in the portal, as they usually do. I think, Tom Walter wants, like he said, like no more than like 6 transfers in the program at any point, whether it's a Cade Lewis who's in his second year or a new guy. But the freshmen that they had last year, like, the Dolan Wentz, the Costellos, and then the emergence of Morningstar. Like, there's another guy who, it's not 3 years of dominance. It's a challenging freshman year, elite sophomore year. Now you have, the junior year.
There's drama in that, though, Bradley, right? What are we talking about here? There's drama. You can't just all be like, oh, he's Drew Burress, he's really good from start to finish. There's got to be we got to round some characters, right?
Yeah. And Wake, obviously, one of the things Walter said too, where it was, everyone talks about Wake as, the pitching lab, pitching development. And, Moose is gone. They bring in, a Houston Astros guy, Eric Neeson, to sort of take over that coaching role. But the funny thing with Wake is in this current run where, they've had multiple first round draft picks in the last 3 years, like 5 of those 7 are position guys. He's like, I don't want to discredit, the pitching development at all. I think we're the best at that and we do really well. But like, we also develop position players and we do a good job with them. And so I think that's one area where it's like, you look at Wentz, you look at Costello, look at the opportunities they got as freshmen. And now you've got, another year of them. So I think Wake's always one where it's, I don't want to say they've ended up in kind of a weird post-hype era where it's like the stacked team that went to Omaha, they've kind of been chasing that, like, the preseason number 1 that didn't really pan out. Last year was kind of all over the place. I think they're one where it's like they win and they produce talent. Like that's going to provide drama, like you said.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like they're far removed from that, right? Like we see Chase Burns and Nick Kurtz is going to be the AL Rookie of the Year in the bigs, but like he started his pro career a year removed from being at Wake Forest. Like they're I like the point about the position players as well, but I do need to mention Chris Lavonis and Duncan Marston are part of that mix when it comes to their pitching staff as well. That could be really encouraging, coupled with Morningstar and like that's they could be sneaky next year. And I say sneaky just because of what you're alluding to, sort of the post-hype, whatever. And Moose's departure plays a part in that because he is so highly regarded and has been so highly regarded as a pitching coach. So there's a little bit of kind of like a prove it feel for Tom Walter and Wake Forest across the board now. I don't know if they view it that way, but I'm sure some do. And I don't know, maybe that's enough to motivate you to, have a particularly good year. They've certainly got the players to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it would be that crazy if they were a better pitching staff this year than last year. Like that's no slight to Muscara, obviously, and not like overhyping, the coaching changes and any of that stuff. I just think they have a bunch of, they didn't go into the portal. They got one guy from the portal, a freshman All-American, Cam Bagwell, UNC Wilmington. There's a guy we should have probably mentioned.
We should have mentioned him. That's a really, really, really good piece.
Yeah. So that's a proven weekend arm who did it as a freshman and has, excellent stuff, probably slots right in. And then you have Morningstar. So that's a 1-2 punch in probably Morningstar bat, whatever order,
Yeah.
That's a 1-2 punch that stacks up really nicely with most. And then you have ideally, a healthy Marston, healthy Lavonis. Like those guys as true freshmen had their development kind of thrown out of whack because they didn't debut till late in the season. Marston barely got a chance to throw much. Those were 2 arms that Marston in particular coming out of the fall were circled. Like Aaron Fitt was like, yep, this is a future, top of the line ace. And so you bring back a bunch of the other guys, obviously some departures, but it just feels like they're returning over half their innings. They added a proven guy. Like it just feels like if they throw more strikes, they have the arm talent. They could be really good.
Yeah, agreed. All right, we're about to hit an hour, which is awesome. Is there anything else you're dying to squeeze in here as we talk about what we're most looking forward to seeing in the fall?
I feel like we inevitably will have missed a team or a transfer or something. You can let us know. I think what stands out to me is as I've gone through this, again, shameless plug, if you're an ACC Extra subscriber, I'm doing a sort of pre-fall series where I'm talking to the coaches, getting a sense of kind of the biggest stories around the program, writing it up. We're 5 teams down, I think. But what's interesting that all these coaches have said is the ACC is as strong or stronger than it's ever been. Like there's been a couple coaches that have been like, yeah, there were programs that we used to play and we kind of say, okay, like we should win 2 out of 3, we should sweep, we're significantly better. And now they're saying like every weekend is a grind. Like you're not escaping, road series in particular. Like it's hard to sweep. Obviously, it's baseball; it's hard to sweep anyway. But it's just gotten harder and harder. And I think that's gets back to that parity point, and is something as the fall gets going and we start to see, okay, here's who these breakout guys could be. Here's who looks good. Just have to keep in mind, like it's a 30-game conference schedule. And all of these teams are going to take their lumps. Like it's impossible not to. And so I think that's just something that's really fun to cover the ACC. Just because like last year with the SEC, there was a Missouri had a really, really challenging season. So South Carolina, was pretty bad as well. That didn't, like, you had that with Cal and Stanford to an extent, but like those teams weren't, just kind of folding over or anything like that. Like Pitt went almost the whole year without getting swept, turn around and sweep Virginia Tech. Like I think that's what's so interesting about the ACC and exciting going into the fall.
Yeah, the parity over the past few years in particular has really jumped out as I think something that stands out about the ACC when being compared to, like, look, we get it, the SEC is the SEC, but it's something that the ACC has that they don't on a year in, year out basis. There's a little bit more, some perpetual tiers, we'll call them, for the SEC as opposed to the ACC, where it just kind of feels like teams get jumbled around the standings, and there are the usual suspects, but not as many of them, and they're not as usual. So it's cool. It's cool to see, and looking forward to another year of that and that wackiness with a lot of new players and old players and new places and all that. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. All right. If you're not a subscriber to ACC Extra and you are listening to this, that doesn't
what
make
are you
sense.
doing?
Rectify that post haste. Always read Bradley Smart, and sometimes listen to me, like once a week, preferably for an hour when you subscribe to this show. So Bradley, great to see you. This was fun. This was good to just kind of like riff on teams for an hour. That's that means it's getting close pretty soon. Before you know it, we'll be talking about what's going on in the preseason, and then we'll be getting the season rolling in February. So I'm pumped up for it. Can't wait.
Let's do it again. Let's do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, right. I got another hour and 3 minutes in me for sure. We will. Maybe in the next couple of weeks is what I'll say. So awesome. Bradley, appreciate the time as always. Thank you for listening to ACC Baseball Etc. Thank you to Academy Sports and Outdoors, and we will catch you next time.